Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to tackle one of the biggest questions in economics. Why on earth do countries trade with each other? Now, it sounds simple, right? But the logic behind it is actually so elegant and so powerful, and it really explains a ton about our global economy. Okay, let's get into it.
So it all starts with this little puzzle. I mean, really think about it for a second. Why would a country that's perfectly capable of growing its own food or building its own cars choose to buy them from thousands of miles away instead? This isn't some newfangled question, you know. Economists have been trying to unravel this one for centuries.
All right, to get to the bottom of that, we got to start with the absolute basics. And the main reason nations trade? Well, it's surprisingly simple. Some countries are just better, or you could say more efficient, at making certain things than other countries are. The famous economist Adam Smith totally nailed this way back in 1776 with his really great analogy. He said, look, just think of a country like a single family, right? Your family doesn't try to grow its own coffee and weave its own fabric for clothes and assemble its own car. No way. You do the job you're good at, you earn money, and then you buy the other stuff you need. Smith argued that nations should do the exact same thing.
And that, right there, is the bottom line. It's all about the cost. Things like a country's climate, its natural resources, the skills of its people, all of these things mean that the cost to produce, say, crude oil in Nigeria, is going to be way, way different than trying to produce it somewhere without any oil fields. And these huge differences in cost, that's the engine that drives all of international trade.
So this whole idea of doing what you're good at, well, Adam Smith actually gave it a formal name. He called it absolute advantage. And it's really the best place to start. It's the most intuitive way to understand why everyone wins when we specialize.
Let's just look at a super simple example. Okay, imagine Nigeria and Ghana have the exact same amount of resources. Workers, land, you name it. If they both decide to split those resources, half for oil and half for cocoa, this table shows you what they can make. Together, the world gets 30 units of oil and 30 units of cocoa.
Now, when you look at those numbers, it's pretty obvious, right? Nigeria can just flat out produce more oil with the same resources. That gives it an absolute advantage in oil. And Ghana? It can produce more cocoa, so it has an absolute advantage in cocoa. It's a straight-up comparison of who's just plain better at making what.
So here's the magic. What happens if they both specialize? Nigeria decides, okay, we're going all in on oil, and Ghana says, we're going all in on cocoa. Now look at the totals. Just by focusing on what they do best, their combined output totally skyrockets.
And this is the whole point. By specializing and then trading with each other, the world suddenly has an extra 10 units of oil and an extra 10 units of cocoa that didn't exist before. This isn't some kind of accounting trick. It's real efficiency. It means there are more goods for everyone. It's a clear win-win.
But, life's never that easy, is it? Adam Smith's theory was brilliant, but it kind of hit a wall when it came up against a more complicated and, frankly, a much more realistic situation.
Exactly. What happens then? What if one country has an absolute advantage in, well, everything? Should it just close its borders and not trade at all? I mean, this was a real puzzle that stumped people until another genius named David Ricardo came along with an idea that was a total game changer. So let's check out this new scenario. In this case, Nigeria is more productive at making both oil and cocoa. So if we just followed Adam Smith's theory, you'd think, well, there's no reason to trade. But Ricardo said, hold on, you're looking at the wrong numbers. You have to look at the hidden costs. And that hidden cost has a name: opportunity cost. Honestly, this might be one of the single most important ideas in all of economics. It's not about the price tag on something. It's about what you have to give up, what you have to sacrifice to make it.
Okay, this table is where the real story is. Let's break it down. For Nigeria to produce one more unit of oil, it only has to give up making half a unit of cocoa. But for Ghana to make one more unit of oil, it has to give up 2 whole units of cocoa. So Nigeria has the lower opportunity cost for oil. Now let's flip it. To make one more unit of cocoa, Ghana only gives up half a unit of oil. But Nigeria has to sacrifice 2 units of oil. See? Ghana has the lower opportunity cost for cocoa.
And that is Ricardo's incredible insight. It doesn't matter who's the best at everything. What matters is who gives up the least to produce something. That's called comparative advantage. And it proves, counterintuitively, that even if one country is more productive in every single way, trade is still good for everybody.
Of course, this beautiful, clean economic theory runs into some messy, real-world problems. The logic is powerful, for sure, But free trade isn't some magic wand that fixes everything. It absolutely creates both winners and losers. So on the one hand, you get all those amazing benefits we just talked about. More stuff for everyone, smarter use of our planet's resources, and way more choice for you as a consumer. But on the other hand, a flood of cheap imports can totally crush new local businesses, and that can lead to job losses. Countries can also become way too reliant on each other. And sometimes countries might even engage in shady practices like dumping. That's when they sell goods for less than they cost to make just to drive their competition out of business.
And it's exactly those disadvantages that make governments want to step in and do something. This whole response to the potential downsides of free trade, well, we usually call it protectionism.
The arguments for putting up trade barriers are almost always a direct answer to the problems we just listed. Governments will say they need to protect their new infant industries until they're strong enough to compete. They'll argue it's about saving local jobs from foreign competition or fighting back against unfair dumping. And, of course, there's always the national security argument, making sure your country can produce things it absolutely needs in a crisis.
And governments have a few main tools in their toolbox to do this. The most common one is a tariff, which is really just a tax on imported goods to make them more expensive. Then you have quotas, which set a hard limit on how much of something you can bring into the country. And finally, there are subsidies, where the government basically gives its own companies money to help them compete.
So, look, if you take just one thing away from all of this today, let it be this. The deep, fundamental logic of trade isn't about who's the absolute best. It's about the subtle, but incredibly powerful calculation of opportunity cost. It's about what you choose not to do so you can be amazing at what you do best.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question for a modern world. When a single phone or a single car has parts and labor that come from a dozen different countries, how do these old theories even apply? What does it really mean for a product to be domestic or local anymore? It's a question that shows just how relevant and how complicated these ideas still are. Thanks for joining me.